Ankur and Bib, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ismail.
So today's topic is a very important one. These days, AI is very popular. Everybody's excited about its potential. But also, it can be scary. There are a lot of ethical considerations with AI, and rightly so. So I'm looking forward to understanding from you guys how we can unpack the ethical considerations around AI and how we can actually govern it so that we put the right guardrails in place, but also get all of the benefits that people have been talking about. So before we get started, can you give us a brief about what you guys do and how you work together?
Sure. My name is Ankur Agarwal, and I work in AWS ProServe as principal with Data and AI specialty. And my responsibility is to lead generative AI initiatives for UKI customers.
Bib Shukla, I'm a principal industry specialist working in financial services company. So I work with leading banks and insurance company to help them strategize and shape the data and AI, and also ground up, operationalize and accelerate the data and AI platform and help them get value out of the business.
So both of you have been working extensively with organizations from when they begin their AI ML journey, and you've seen the challenges that they face throughout that journey. So on to the topic, what is AI governance and why does it matter?
So I'll first cover why it matters. What we are seeing in the market, that there is a lot of excitement around AI. And with the generative AI, there are a lot of POCs which are being conducted with public data sets. Early value is being identified, but we are seeing a slowdown in path to production because there are evolving understanding or requirements which are still being worked upon with regards to the security, control, and governance around these models, so that they perform in more fairly, ethically, transparently, and there are accountabilities associated in what they say, what they predict, what the content that those models generate. So AI governance is all about having a right set of mechanisms, policies, and technical guardrails to make sure that these models are deployed and they cover the aspects that I just mentioned about fair, they are transparent, and there is an accountability in the organization to take them forward. What we are increasingly seeing, and it is supported by a lot of research which is being conducted, I'll quote one of the ones from Deloitte, that 72% of the organizations are still concerned about the risk associated around ethics and security with regards to AI model deployment.
72%. That is a whopping majority. Bib, are you seeing the same in your
Yeah,
engagement?
so let me talk about from a consumer side. Accenture did a study part of that. So only 35% of the consumer trust organizations who use AI to make decisions, right? And more than 70% of the consumers think that the organization should be responsible if any harm is done through AI, right? So that's quite important. The pressure is on the organizations, right? So coming back to the definition of what is AI governance, so if you look at it in a simplistic view, AI governance refers to the policies, the practices, the tools, and the processes to allow you to responsibly build, deploy, and manage AI systems. The key part of that is understanding and managing the risk while scaling the value out of AI systems.
So from what you're mentioning, both from the organizational side and from the consumer side, it's clear that this is something crucial to get right. How do organizations implement this successfully?
This is an evolving field because the pace of innovation and pace of excitement and the value it brings changing very quickly. So I'll try to answer this question in 4 parts. That organizations are revisiting their AI strategy, and if we refer to some of the guidelines that came out of EU AI Act or NIST, Risk Management AI Framework, they talk about having the right governance which is proportionate to the risk involved. So don't try to build the governance which is one size fits all. Create a mechanism where you have clarity, create a foundational strategy, and then iterate it as the use case evolve, as you understand your use cases, as you learn while experimenting with the technology or with what is available in the market. So learn from competitors, learn from the market, and then evolve it over a period of time. The second area is having buy-in from the top, that set up AI steering committees or councils with cross-sectional expertise in the organization. So I'm not talking about any theoretical forums which reviews initiatives periodically. I'm talking about a powerhouse that has got a decision-making capability and that spans across all your areas that cover the risk, like risk management, ethics, your branding teams, plus all the business stakeholders who are actually going to get benefit out of these AI-related use cases.
So they're almost like a PMO function for AI projects.
I'm actually elevating this even further. So organizations over a number of years already have got these kind of steering councils whenever it comes to use of data. Yeah. And there is a potential, or consider repurposing those to cover AI going forward. And these are the councils that actually do prioritization based on the use case and the risk associated. B, they act as an escalation point of contact in case there are issues while developing or deploying any of these use cases. So this was the second point, where you are starting from the top and making sure that there is a council to go to take guidance, to formulate policies and refine the policies over a period of time.
So just on that point, it sounds like a great approach for sure, and it is needed, especially because taking something experimental from POC to production requires that intentional effort. But might that steerco not be overwhelmed with the extra governance requirements that they may feel would slow down that powerhouse pace that you talked about?
Yeah, that's why we are talking about, there are two ways I'll answer this question. One is that I mentioned about tailoring or dialing the governance based on the life cycle of the use cases. So as the use case start and go into conceptualization, ideation, design and build phase, have more tighter guardrails so that all the right requirements are baked in from the start. And as the use case start going into production and that bubble support ceases, then you make it more like a monitoring mode. So you don't have to keep the governance on all the time at the same strength. So consider that you have not just set it once and keep just forget it all the time. You start it and then continue it, but in a different mode or different fashion. Second point to answer to your question is that yes, those governance forum may get overwhelmed, but this is where the use of technology comes. So I'm working with certain customers to actually build innovation portal. So use technology to guide those forums so that their decision making become faster. That the information which is talking about that portal, where users or different business units can actually submit their ideas, and there are model technology available to triage and match those ideas or refine those ideas, do a level of risk assessment so that the decision making for the steering committee becomes easier. So you are actually doing a lot of heavy lifting using technology, making it easier for the steering committee to take decisions. And there are a lot of what we anticipate to see is that majority of the decisions, majority of the learning is actually going to come within the tool itself, within the innovation portal itself, which is going to guide the submitter that whether this idea is a great idea, how much risk is involved before they even go down to the steering committee level.
Okay, so just to connect the different parts that you mentioned here, it seems like selecting the right use cases and picking something small that that we can iterate on quickly is crucial, and also having that executive sponsorship, which is embodied in that steering committee. The steering committee has governance standards that they will roll out through the iterations and then set it to kind of a monitoring level in the future, so that all of that extra governance is just for a period of time, and then use technology to triage those use cases that we talked about at the beginning so that they're evaluated for risk before they even get to the steerco, so that when they start their job, they can go full speed ahead on innovating and iterating on these AI plus governance MVPs.
Absolutely. And just to add to my point around how to make this happen. So we have talked about top down. Where this helps is also creating a bottom up, because creating communities of innovators, creating communities of data scientists who have practical knowledge, domain experts, through this innovation portals, they can actually collaborate. So over a period of time, this tool portal is going to learn more and is going to advise that how can you refine your ideas better? What are the advancements in the technologies that may input into refinement of the policies which was set in the beginning? So you are creating a more like a feedback loop where some of the decisions or guidelines are coming from the top, but there is a feedback mechanism from the bottom where the practicality is being fed into the policies, and that's how you're creating a more sustainable form of governance where you have knowledge sharing, you have feedback loops, and you are iterating it over a period of time. And then all of this information, all of this is being assisted by the same tool which is going to be used for innovation, which is that innovation portal.
Okay, so this is kind of a holistic way of making it work.
And exactly, making it more sustainable.
Yeah. And I like that the approach is practical. We're not ignoring the organizational challenges of any place where people need to come together and build something new. There needs to be executive sponsorship. There needs to be low-hanging fruit. There needs to be a specific team that is designated to push this forward. And there needs to be a bottom-up grassroots effort, because the people closest to the business know the things that will produce the most value.
Absolutely. And the last point, which I don't want to miss, is, and very important, there is a lot of, again, a FOMO kind of, when the GenAI came out, everybody wanted to play with it because there are quick benefits seen. And this point is about awareness and training in the wider organization, so that all this governance does not remain limited to certain set of individuals who are like steering committees or people who have ideas. All the consumers in the organizations are being made aware about, yes, these are the good side of technologies, but have how it works under the hood, so that hazards, common hazards are being made aware of. We noticed that some of the organization, when this technology came out, suddenly put a break or put a full stop on use of this technology because there was a risk of internal data going out to train the models. So you create awareness so that people are aware of the goods and hazards of particular technologies. There is a right level of coaching and guidance available that whenever what you should and should not do with certain tech. And of course, technology guardrails where suddenly if there is a new tech comes and user data is being submitted which is sensitive to the organization, there are blockages available so that human errors are also eliminated using these technology guardrails.
So I see that there are different layers of governance here, right? I mean, the most basic level is employee governance, and then we've got data governance, and now we're talking about AI governance. But with the advent of GenAI, it seems like the potential for abuse could be so much more than classical machine learning, as we'll call it. So, Bib, how do you see governance evolving the more GenAI evolves?
So let's start looking at the value GenAI brings to our society and community, right? So very excited about it. McKinsey did a great study about it, which will bring $2.6 to $4.4 trillion annually globally to community and businesses. AI system is not new, right? So we consider GenAI as a subset of AI systems. What changed is that traditional AML, you kind of using a set of data sets to train the model and predict the best action. But with the advent of cloud technologies, so with the availability of a large amount of data, with the availability of large amount of computing power, these large language models or foundation models being built to use billions of parameters to inform the model. So what it does is extrapolates the patterns from those petabytes of data and create contents. So contents means videos, images, and it mimics like human creativity, right? And that's where it also amplifies some of the risk. We talked about the traditional AI/ML, right? So I'll talk about 6 key consideration we should look at when building AI system using GenAI or traditional AI/ML, because some of these concerns or considerations still valid for traditional AI/ML, but it's amplified by GenAI solutions or GenAI use cases. Let's look at one of the things is ethics and bias, right? So we should be, organizations should consider about filtering out the harmful response, for example, make sure the toxicity in terms of the data used to train the model is not there, the bias, the distribution of kind of the data is so that the bias is not there in the data and doesn't impact the output of the model. So these things are quite critical, and it does apply to the traditional AI/ML model, but it also applies to the GenAI part of it as well. The second point is the data governance part. We do work with MIT and CDOs of a lot of organizations, and because a lot of organizations looking at ways to scale the business value using the AI/ML use cases, right? And one of the key challenges they struggle to scale that is because of the data quality, making high quality data available for these use cases. So having the right data governance from an architecture, from a tool sets, from a process point of view, to ingest data, transform the data, catalog the data, and making it available to this AI consumers, whether it's GenAI use case, whether it's traditional AI/ML use case, allows the organization to scale value out of it, right? And the third key point, which is kind of the security and the intellectual property, right? So Ankur mentioned that some data, some organizations are concerned about exposing data to the external, and so we need to make sure the organization considered all the tools and to have the right access throughout the life cycle of the data. So they manage that data and make sure that they have the right guardrails so that the IP in the model itself is not exposed, right? So that's quite key. And so these are the 3 key points. And if you look at focusing on the GenAI part, which is hallucination, where GenAI creates contents which feels real, which seems like to be real, but it's fabricated. It's not correct. So how do you organization consider or put guardrails or filtering or human in the loop or using that domain data to reduce that risk of hallucination, right? The 5th point is how do you make sure that this AI systems and the GenAI use cases adheres to your brand guidelines, right? Your kind of the tone of voice. For example, if you're building a solution for the contact center agent, so how do you check that the tone of voice, what the virtual assistant recommending is abide by your human tone of voice, for example, right? So those things are important, and consideration is to be done to make sure that the governance is kind of built into it, right? The last point I want to highlight is the recency, because when we're seeing a trend that a lot of model providers building large language models and making it available for the organization to use, right? So that reduces the bar to entry for the large language model, right? And recency in terms of the data being used to train the large language model. So if you're using a large language model as a AI coding companion, and for example, take an example, Java or any other language, and a new version of the code has come out, and if the model is not trained on a new version, the recommendation coming out of the model might have security loopholes, might not follow the best practices features. So that's quite important that you kind of continuously monitor these AI systems to make sure you cover all these 6 aspects of the systems, right?
From what you're saying here, this is kind of a 6-point framework for being able to evolve governance with GenAI. It's not necessarily like a one-off or a responsibility of a specific team. It actually has to be embedded or baked into the way that an organization does things.
Yeah, so I think every organization already have a data governance process and tools, right? So they already have some kind of mechanism to manage the existing AI systems, right? So what we're saying here is that these are the additional consideration possibly to look at to upgrade their governance process, to enhance their risk management process, because in the bottom line is that you need to understand and manage the risk with the new solutions, new GenAI systems coming up, right? So as long as you can understand those additional consideration, additional guardrails, then you can work backwards from that in a use case by use case. I think Ankur mentioned about that. We don't need to boil the ocean here. Look at use case by use case and and build the governance iteratively, right? So you might have a use case which is not high risk. So look at what are the capabilities from a foundational element perspective, consider those and build those as a foundation element so the other use cases will coming in, they're already available for them, right?
Right, that's an important point, and I think Ankur touched on that earlier, which is the governance can also be iterative. It doesn't have to be from the ground up. And I think that, especially if you're working in a regulatory environment or in an industry that is highly regulated, there is this urge to put the brakes on everything, get all of the regulation right first, and then allow the use cases to start. But from what you're saying, it seems like that's not really a successful way to do it. There's no reason to boil the ocean. We can ring fence the risk to that use case. We don't have to say that it's going to be all or nothing. And then for that use case, apply the appropriate governance and guardrails. And that way, even the regulator, whether that's internal or external, can evolve the governance to match the speed of the use case.
We think this way in terms of taking a two-way door, right? So if you look at the benefit of the use case patterns, what we're seeing for the GenAI, right? So you're looking at enhancing the internal and external customers. You're looking at improving the productivity. You're looking at summarizing, questioning, doing question answer for certain customers. So if you take a two-way door where there is a less kind of risk to your customer, to your brand, and possibly looking at doing internal use cases and getting feedback from your internal stakeholders and refining building the guardrails, building the governance, and then taking that use case to production and possibly to the external customers. So that is, I think, learning from that, because learning is enabling the internal team, learning from it, and building that key foundation to safeguard your customer, your brand, your organization is quite important, right? So, but do it in an iterative way.
Yeah, and that's when all the points that Bib has talked about, if you start with internal use cases, not all the points might apply. That if case you're talking about knowledge management, internal knowledge management, there are some of those aspects which you might actually have slightly you might be slightly relaxed on. So it basically fast tracked the use case development. So if you want to test, let's say, on natural language processing around chatbots, it actually helps you go ahead with chatbot for internal use case so that you mature that capability around chatbots to be used for external customers. And while in the background, you can continue working on the aspects of brand tone and values, or brand guidelines and values. So you can always customize it and add it, starting with the internal use case, and then roll it out to external customers.
I think this is a safer way for a lot of organizations to test things, because then they have the blast radius of concerns are reduced, right? You don't have to worry about GDPR, right to be forgotten, what you're doing with the customer data, the internal data being leaked to an LLM outside of your environment. You can just ring fence that to the data that you already own and you have control over, and you are the one who's basically regulating it. I want to expand on that point, actually, because you talked about risk assessments a couple of times. What are the key ethical considerations that organizations need to consider when they're deploying AI ML, especially with GenAI? So for things that have to do with risk or customer interactions or decisions that need to be made, for example.
Yeah, I think one of the key ones here is transparency and explainability. And this is, again, a problem that has existed even with traditional AI systems. And for one of the customers, large telco in the UK, if it took us X amount of time to be able to predict customers' satisfaction scores, it took us almost third of that time to make sure that the board understands how that black box, which is an AI system, has predicted that value. So explainability, which it's difficult to trust the output of these systems unless there's a framework available on how it has predicted that predicted a particular score, a particular output. And with GenAI, one of the key points that Bib mentioned earlier is predictability in the outcome. So traditional AI system had predictability in the outcome because they were trained on certain governed data set, while GenAI is trained on very wide data set where there is unpredictability in the outcome. Same question asked multiple times, you might get a different answer. So what we are saying is that there are already certain tools or technologies available like Sharp that was used for talking about that large telco to be able to do a weighted scoring of different parameters which have been used to do the prediction. Second, there are tools available from Amazon as well, SageMaker Clarify, that also has got capability to do certain level of foundational model accuracy assessment, where on the robustness, on the bias, toxicity, and those are the ones which can be used to do the check around explainability as well as some of those explainability aspects and give you a bit of a confidence that technology is saying it. But I think one of the points that we'll definitely talk about is human in the loop, that how you augment these decision making with human in the loop that authenticates or provide an extra level of governance on the output being shown by these models or AI systems.
What you're saying here is that really the concern that organizations have is that we're not really able to hold AI accountable the way that we would with a human. So we need to find a way to enhance explainability and predictability, just like we would if we were giving that responsibility to a human being, but also augmenting that still with a human in the loop, so that if there are any gaps in the way that we're assessing the model that we're deploying or in whatever we've set up to explain it, there's still that last line of defense where there's still a human being overseeing all of this and making sure that it's abiding by our ethical standards as an organization.
Absolutely. Any answer which is given by this AI system, there has to be an accountability taken by a human in the organization. And therefore, having the loop, having an opportunity for human to validate is a great way of telling the system that, or teaching this AI system that how it should work. And then there is a learning which comes out that what are the cases where it actually gives a result that needs to be corrected, and taking that into account for the future trading data sets.
So let me give an example, especially in the financial industry, right? Responsible lending and underwriting. So that's a key area banks and insurance companies focus to use AML to provide customized pricing, for example, or specific rates, for example. And discrimination against, so if you don't have explainability and discrimination against a certain category of people would violate the equality law. So it's very important that the decisions, AML, especially in the financial industry, is kind of explainable in a simple way, not only to the internal stakeholders, but also to the customers as well, right? So, for example, if the organization is using robo-advisor or fraud detection, for example, use cases, you need to be very systematic, you need to be very specific about why certain AI systems is recommending certain output, right? So that's very, very important to be understand that from a human perspective, and also some cases where you have to explain it to the customer. So that's quite critical.
Any organization will do their best to address these three things: explainability, predictability, and having a human in the loop. But at the end of the day, once it goes live, there are still risks associated with AI/ML systems. From what you've seen, Bib, what are the ways that an organization can mitigate the risks associated with AI/ML? I mean, first of all, what are the main risks and how can we?
So I think we talked about kind of having a robust governance to kind of allow to scale the AI systems, right? So let's take an example where you have put some AI system into production, right? How you want to make sure that you still have those kind of governance in place to allow any kind of change. So continuous monitoring. So model drift is where your distribution of data change over the period of time. So that deteriorates the model performance, for example. So you need to continuously monitor the outcome of the model based on what the benchmark against when you train the model, right? So, and if you monitor that, identify that, and automate that notification to the key stakeholders, then to take actions against it. Some customers, they even automate that part of it. So automatically build training pipeline with the new data sets. Once the model threshold goes beyond certain points, they can automatically train set up the training line And they only come into the picture if certain anomalies is detected, right? So from a human in the loop perspective. Otherwise, it's fully automated, so you can train with the latest data. But at the same time, you need to be able to have a platform, MLOps platform, to rapidly update the models, right? Because if you have a version 1 of the model and you want to change it to the second version, it takes a year to do that in a production system. That will create risk for your AI systems, right? You should have a MLOps platform which allows you to rapidly update those models in production, right? The other bit is the security aspect of it. So you need to make sure that the models, the data is secured. So for example, the data you use to train the model, the poisoning of that, injecting poisonous data to it is not allowed. You have the right guardrails for it. Once you train the model, that's your IP, right? So you make sure you protect, for example, stop all the guardrails for the jailbreak of the model, because once your model is, for example, you mentioned about weights in the model, right? So once it's exposed, then that's your intellectual property. You lose the value, all the effort you did, all the investment you did, you lose that part of that. So you need to protect that. So these are the key considerations in terms of continuously monitoring the model, continuously make sure that the model gives the right value, right output as per your business need.
So just like we do a process of requirements analysis from the business, and based on that, we've identified the AI ML use case, and then we've put it into production. In the same way, we need to analyze our governance and security requirements, and then deploy those and embed them into the MLOps process, so that the process of MLOps itself is also a process of implementing governance, security, whatever guardrails we have in place. So regarding the human in the loop, especially in the context of financial services, what is the role across the whole life cycle of the human in the loop? I mean, what you described seems to be in the context of just training the model at the beginning. The human oversees the output, makes corrections, and then the validation that the human was doing now gets automated. Is that the only part where human oversight is useful, or are there other parts that they need to intervene, basically?
So we're looking at kind of typically 3-4 different areas, right? So and especially I think we touched on the transparency and the explainability. So we kind of, even the AI ML model have a great accuracy, right? You still need human in the loop to have that domain knowledge, to have the contextual knowledge, because sometimes your model is tested on within a specific set of data, but having that domain knowledge, the impact, understanding the impact on wider business, on your brand, on your customer, on your organization, that's quite key, right? So that's where the human control, the human in the loop is quite important. The second point is that certain use cases where somebody needs to be accountable, organizations or a human needs to be accountable, right? From a compliance perspective, from a legal point of view. So even your AI system provides a high accuracy output, but still your human is to audit that output, right? So they need to validate that so that they understand how the AI system working, because that is quite crucial from a compliance and legal point of view. The third thing, which is the regulations, right? Some of the financial industry areas where it mandates that you have a human in the loop, right? So, for example, doing a lending decision, right? So that's where you kind of could affect the customer quite in a big way. Second thing is the fraud, right? So there's another area where you need to understand why and what the AI system is recommending, right? So human loop is quite critical part of that. The other soft side of it is more the ethical side of it, right? So where you need to make sure that the systems, the AI system and GenAI system adheres to the ethical, whether it's a toxicity perspective, whether it's from a responsible AI perspective, you filter those out before it goes to even your internal customers and external customers. So those are kind of areas we're looking at, and it's evolving, right? Based on the use case by use case, you'll find different ways where human in the loop or human context is quite critical. And we see that the AI system as an assistant to remove those undifferentiated workload to allows the human to make decision faster and better.
Correct. And it's not just for financial industry. I think the point that Bib mentioned is about domain expertise, auditing the results. This is I think applicable for most industries where the internal data or IP of an organization is to be used for any of these AI systems decision making.
Okay, so looking at the whole life cycle, we can start with, first of all, where's a human needed, right? Where do we need to validate? And also, where are we required to have a human based on regulations, based on policy? And then using that as a starting point, we start to iterate and see which parts can we actually automate and which parts will continue to have human oversight.
Feedback, yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes kind of the human augmented with AI,
Yeah.
futuristic looking hybrid way of working. That would be the steady state of the model, correct? So we talked a lot about why, we talked about what. The question is, who is going to do this, right? We've heard from all of the organizations that we work with, it's difficult to attract talent. It becomes even more difficult with more specialized skills. So, recruiting AI ML specialists, difficult. Recruiting GenAI specialists, even more difficult than that. Now we need to recruit GenAI specialists who understand governance as well. So how do you attract and retain talent for something like that?
No, if you're looking at scaling value, business value using AI system, I think to introduce those use cases, those productivity, those things into your business, you need the right mix of skills from technical skills, business domain skills, and continuously evolving, right? So, because I think Ankur talked about having that innovation period where you need a team of people who can try out new technologies and understand the value to the business, right? So AI skill is hot in the market, right? So, but we look at it in a few different ways you can address that, right? So from an executive perspective, right? So you need a single-threaded leader, you need kind of a group of people at executive level who can drive the communication, drive the governance, drive those things, right? So you need to have that level of support. And then you need to kind of look at it, the people from a skills perspective, train. I always say like upskill people, looking at opportunities where you can use GenAI and other solution to increase the productivity. For example, we have Amazon Code Whisperer. We can work as a AI kind of code assistant to supplement the developers. And that's where it's basically a win-win-win, because it gives you a code and it allows you to deliver feature faster. At the same time, it scans for security loopholes. So, and it increases the developer's experience, right? So, and if you look at all this aspect, looking at those kind of tools to enhance your developers' kind of productivity, kind of development part of it, and part of that innovation as well, delivering faster, failing faster, and showing value to the business faster. And you have to look at it, how do you manage your upskilling of the so not only the technical skill, but also the business side, right? How do they understand the risk, the challenges of all this AI system, GenAI systems, and having the right ethics, right guardrails will help definitely in that space. But this is a very hot area, right? So I'm very close to it. So I think it's more about understanding the use case, understanding the need in a more of a long-term plan, and building that plan, upskilling your internal staff on that will take you a great way in scaling that value with GenAI and other AI systems.
So it's very much a bottom-up approach, not like we're just writing a job description, expert in AI governance. No, just like we're iterating the AI use case, we're iterating the governance, and we're creating the steerco that you mentioned earlier. Those people are actually upskilling on governance that way, learning by doing, learning by iterating, and then through the process, the organization has evolved its governance, and it's also evolved its governance skills through its people.
Correct. Because this is the skill which is relatively new or still developing. There isn't suddenly a pool of people becoming available to address this, right? These are the same organizations who have to evolve or upskill people.
So we just want to add one more thing, right? Some of the employees, they value ethics quite highly, right? So having that transparent ethical value of your company and having that transparency with your internal staff motivates even the staff to kind of stay with the organizations, right? So, and it's quite critical, right? So that that they feel part of the organization, they feel part of the change which is happening, part of the AI system. And so having that transparency even with the internal staff is quite critical as well.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a connected world now where we are more conscious of the impact the organizations that we work for have on the rest of the world, on the environment, and on culture, on other countries, etc. So being transparent with, how can we use AI to further the mission of our organization and even do things better than we were doing them before, is something that is an important part of employee satisfaction, right? So to your point, that transparency would help them drive that retention. So we unpacked the process of setting all of this up, bringing it all together. How can a new CDO work with a Chief Information Security Officer to take everything you've talked about and put it together into an action plan?
Yeah, so with this, we'll try to summarize everything that we have said by making sure that we are not boiling the ocean when it comes to AI governance, doing it in more tenet-based, and this is where Amazon Learning comes, that we set some tenets which are important for you and your customers with regards to how they want AI system to work transparently, fairly, ethically, and there is accountability in place. And the purpose of these tenets is to give high velocity and high quality decision making to the team downwards, so that they have guidelines to work with, that they don't have to ask each and every question every time. And the purpose of this is to not take a very long time writing big strategy or big governance process. That is number one. Number two that we mentioned is setting up cross-functional decision makers, or getting them those decision makers in committees which are having decision-making authorities on prioritizing use cases, risk, and also approving these iterative policies that are written based on these tenets. The third one is the right framework. So setting up technological framework that your 2-pizza data scientist or ML team can use, that they don't have to build them at the same time they're building the use case. So frameworks are available and they're testing or validating their ideas against those frameworks. Fourth is right tools. So a lot of tools are available. Having a shortlisted or a set of tools that you have, which are not just aiding the development, but also validating what is being done as far as these policies are concerned. And we kind of mentioned SageMaker Clarify is being one of them. And last and not the least is a lot of these applications, GenAI applications, will be external facing, exposed to your consumers. And that's where building the trust or retaining the trust is important, by making sure that the consent and privacy is taken into account whenever you are thinking about those personalization type of use cases Bib talked about, that how the consent has been captured, what is the authority or method being given to the customers so that they have opportunity to change or manage their consent, and any data which is being processed, any recommendation which is being given to them is rightfully done within those guardrails of those boundaries. Bib, you want to add anything?
Yeah, so just I think that's excellent. Summarize all of the discussion here. I think just one thing I want to add. Like, I'm very excited about the value that GenAI can bring to the business and to the community, right? So, and having those kind of guardrails, those kind of principles in place, we're very hopeful that business can understand and manage the risk and scale the value with AI to drive their businesses and customer.
So I think, to echo everything you guys have been saying, I'm also excited about AI, but there are concerns around using it, and it's super important for us to make sure that it is being used responsibly in an ethical way that mirrors the ethics of human beings, so that it doesn't hurt other people and defeat the purpose of why it's being developed in the first place. So this is a super important topic. Thank you for sharing this with us. It was great speaking to you.
Thank you for having us.